Hi, my name's Adela Cojab, and I'm a Syrian Lebanese Jew born in Mexico City.
And I'm Mariam Wahba, and I am a Coptic Christian from Egypt. We are coming together to untangle love, culture, religion, faith, and everything in between.
This is Americanish, Daughters of Diaspora.
All right, Adela, let's dive right in. So through this journey, we're going to get to know each other very well, and we want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us. So the first thing I want to talk about is how we ended up here. We are from very different backgrounds, from the other side of the world, and we ended up here in different ways, winning versus losing the lottery, if you will. So Adela, can you tell me a little bit more about how you ended up in New York doing what you are doing now?
So it's a great question. I'm really excited that we're doing this. So my family's originally from Syria and from Lebanon, and they moved to Mexico, of all places, where I was born. And I grew up in Mexico as a Syrian Lebanese Jew. And Mexico wasn't really the safest place. And one thing led to another, and my family decided to move to the United States. When we first moved, we just wanted to move for a couple of years. It was never really the plan to stay. And after our third, fourth year here, my mom realized this is the place to live. She was living the American dream. You know, in Mexico, your car gets stolen, even if you have it under lock and key. In the town I grew up in New Jersey, people leave their car on with the keys at 7-Eleven to get their coffee so it doesn't get cold in the morning. So it was just very different, you know, kids riding their bikes alone on the street instead of not being allowed to go to the movies on their own. And it was just a very different life, and my mom loved it. And that's when we applied for the lottery, which is a visa lottery to be able to stay in the U.S. with a green card. And we've applied 3 times, and we've still lost. So we're still on our path to citizenship. I've been here since 2001. It's been 20 years, hitting 21 years here.
Wow.
But I know that there's no place I'd rather be. I know that this is where I want to build my future, the opportunities I've had here. What about you? I understand your experience is slightly different.
So it's really interesting because I didn't even know you can apply for the lottery while being in the U.S. because the way I ended up here is, so I'm from Egypt. I'm from Minya, which is the Coptic province, some people call it. And my mom, coming out of church once, the priest was telling her just apply for this thing, and we didn't even know what it is, and it's something about America, and everything was super vague. But she was pregnant, and my mom's a little wild, for relatively wild. My mom's cool. So she decided to throw her name in the hat, and she went back to her family's house, to my dad's family's house where she lived, and forgot all about it, and everybody was making fun of her. You're going to get to go to Egypt. You know, remember to send back good moisturizer. I wrote a piece about that. And about a year later, she had given birth with my youngest sister, and she got this letter. This postman came looking for her in the village because there's no addresses in Egypt. You just kind of know where everybody lives. And the letter was like, you won a lottery to go to America, to the U.S., and here's the steps you have to take. And fast forward 3 years, trips back and forth to Cairo. We end up in New York. We end up in Queens. And I was 7 years old at the time. My parents never really told me things, or if they did, I don't really remember it. I just kind of remember one day we drove to the airport. My mom, in very Arab fashion, had one too many suitcases, kind of like dumping them onto the railway, in tears, telling my grandparents goodbye. I don't know when I want to see them again. And then I'm in Queens on a cold November night, standing in this crooked sidewalk. And I'm here, and we've been here ever since. But back to you for a sec. So how did your family end up in Mexico?
Yeah, so in the pretty much any time after 1948, the Middle East became a very turbulent place for Jews. So my family in the 70s left Lebanon with fake Iranian passports through Canada to get to Mexico because there was actually a large Syrian Jewish community that was already forming. So my mom happened to be born in Canada. The rest of her siblings were all born in Mexico. That's where she met my dad, who had been in Mexico for 2 generations already. And my brother and I were both born we ended up in New Jersey because when we needed to move, we were looking at Miami, as most Mexican Jews do. And then we got a bar mitzvah invitation in the mail from a cousin of mine who lived in Deal, New Jersey, this town that's a small enclave for Syrian Jews. It's our little haven where everyone knows each other, and you have, everyone's grandma knows each other, and you go to the grocery store and you know everyone there. And my mom, went to this bar mitzvah and was like, this is it. This is the American dream. And if we're going to move anywhere for 3 years, it'll be here. But again, the plan was never to stay. So we were living in the U.S. under a different visa that my dad had. And my parents, after a couple of years, decided to get divorced. And my dad moved back to Mexico, taking his visa with him. So my mom found herself in a foreign country. My 2 sisters were born in the U.S., so she had 4 kids. She didn't have an education, she didn't have job experience, and she didn't have a visa to be able to stay in the country. So my mom decided to go back to college. Number one, because it's the easiest visa to get. And that's the first time we applied for the lottery that we essentially lost.
Yeah.
After my mom had her student visa, she got a work visa. My brother and I were under her visas because we were both non-citizens. My sisters were both American. And it was just a different chain of visa after visa after visa. And after getting rejected again for the lottery, my mom asked me if I wanted to be Canadian. And that's such a weird question. Like, hey, do you want to be Canadian? And I was like, well, what's the catch?
being Canadian, that's the catch.
Nothing against Canadians. I am now proudly Canadian, though I've never lived in Canada. I don't plan on living in Canada. God save the Queen if they still say that. But because my mom happened to be born in Canada, I got Canadian citizenship through her. And then we applied again for the lottery as Canadians, and we again did not get it for some reason. But at this point, I'm building a career, I'm working hard, and the secret that they don't tell you is that nationality works in a very weird way. My mom happens to be Canadian because she was born there. All her siblings are Mexican. My grandpa is a citizen of Canada, been living in Mexico for 40 years, not a citizen of Mexico. Wow. Not a citizen of the U.S. But I know that this is where I want to build my roots, and this is where I want to build my life. And at the same time, my sisters are U.S. born, and they're anchor babies. So I should be American within the next 3 years or so. I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, we'll see how that works out. I can't imagine how that must feel to be living here and have this American identity and going through these motions of being an American, but officially on papers not being American.
Yeah.
And here's where I want us to shift gears a little bit and talk about the sense of being derooted and having to build roots somewhere else that I don't know if I want to say doesn't accept you, but is maybe not aware of who you are. Or maybe sometimes I feel like I don't know who I am either. There's so many layers to our identities, and this is everybody. It's not just us. Think about who you are and scope out, go 30,000 feet above, and who you are is these layers of complex things. So can you tell me a little bit more about that journey and how you've managed to build roots, or how you're doing that actively?
Yeah, so I got very lucky in that the Syrian Jewish community is very close and very tight-knit and very similar everywhere. So, I grew up in the Syrian Jewish community in Mexico. I had cousins in the Syrian Jewish community in Brazil. And then I moved to the Syrian Jewish community in New Jersey. So as worldly as I thought I was, I really only knew the same community in different countries. But it was the same traditions, the same last names, the same first names, the same families. It was the same structure, the same expectations. So when I moved to the U.S., the hard thing was not having my family around me because, being Syrian, Jewish, and Hispanic, family is everything. So that was a really hard thing, especially for holidays. But I was lucky that I got to have my family nearby and that Mexico is not that far. I was able to visit for summers, visit for holidays. And I know that Egypt isn't necessarily as close. So, what's interesting is that in the U.S., no one is from here originally. Yeah. If you go back far enough, a couple of generations, everyone came from somewhere. But we both came here. We did, as not even first generation American, but we're first generation immigrants. So for you, it must have been a little bit harder. Do you feel like, how are you building your roots here? Is it through community, through school? Is it through church?
Yeah, I feel like for the longest time, and tell me if you relate to this, I actively worked to distance myself from my community. And maybe part of it is being a minority. Copts are not. This is tough to even like work through because I want to be kind to my own community and my own people, but historically we've been oppressed and persecuted, and I hated that about us. To be very, very honest, it was so difficult seeing. I wanted to be a strong person. I was in a community and in a society now where I was allowed to be a girl and go to school. I was allowed to show my hair. I was allowed to do all these interesting things, but I'd go to church or I'd talk to my parents, and we internalized that victimhood, and we internalized that persecution, and, walk close to the wall, be careful what you say, have this specific job, go to med school, be a lawyer, be a doctor, be careful what you do. And I hated that. So up until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I've been so actively distancing who I am from myself. And honestly, that was tough because I thought I was doing something that made me happy, but I was fighting myself constantly. And just in the past, to answer your question, just in the past 2 or 3 years, I think I've found a way to deal with those sides of my community and my religion and my faith that I don't necessarily love, and turn them into something positive. I'm going to church a lot more. And we growing up, church Sunday, every weekend, we'd go to church at least once. But I would never pay attention, and I would actively reject it. Like in our Coptic weddings, we say, like when we exchange vows, I guess, there's a line about obeying the husband. I hated that. Anytime people would get married in the church, I would walk out. I would never go to confession because I thought I was rebelling against the church or whatever. And just more recently, I think I'm learning to appreciate who I am and appreciate that culture. And when I look at people who did what I used to do, I kind of get angry because, and I'm sure that's something you can relate with, is like, how dare you? Your ancestors survived 2,000 years of persecution and people actively trying to kill them, and all odds were against you, and you made it. Your survival is a miracle, and you're actively trying to destroy it? How dare you? And again, I'm mad at myself when I'm saying this, and it's something that I'm actively trying to change. Tell me a little bit about your derooting story and where you're at now.
So the funny thing is I had a very, very similar experience to you. I grew up, from the moment we moved to New Jersey, I went to a Syrian Jewish school where all my friends were Syrian Jews, and it was the only thing I knew. So growing up in my elementary, middle, and high school, I always wanted to be edgy and different. And I already knew I was going to be edgy and different. And, I was the only girl in AP Calculus, and my friends weren't taking AP Chemistry. And a lot of them really didn't plan to go to college. A lot of them were dating guys that were 6-7 years older than them at the time, and they already knew what they were going to do after they graduated. And I knew I wanted to go to college, and that was like the different thing. And while I was in my community, it was so easy and liberating almost to push back until I stepped onto a college campus. And once I got to college, my first 2 years I spent distancing. I said, I'm not going to be the Jewish girl. I'm not going to be, the one that's the Syrian one that's only friends with the other Syrian Jews that go to NYU. Then the chat, we have the Syrians at NYU chat. And I really wanted to be different. So I didn't dorm in the Jewish dorm. I had a radio show. I didn't get involved in all the things that I should have, or later got very involved in. And it wasn't until I wrote a paper that compared the Syrian Jewish community to Foucault's regime of truth, because we control the means of information and all these things. And my professor was really happy about it. He's like, you should consider publishing. And we thought about this back and forth. And then I told my mom, and she was like, well, can I read it? And I was like, no. And I said, how did I come to write a paper that I'm so ashamed of showing to everyone who's important to me? And that was kind of where I had my moment, where I opened my eyes and I said, something's wrong here. There's cognitive dissonance. I'm living 2 different lives. I'm believing 2 different things. And that's when I took a step back and became actually appreciative. And that's exactly how I feel now towards the people who are going through their clashing phase. It's important. It's important. But there's a difference between being a hater and being a revolutionary. And I think it's important to strive for change and making our communities better from within instead of just looking at it from the outside and trying to tear it down. But, I want to go back to the idea of roots and building community. I already had my community set up when I showed up to the U.S. But recently I had a friend. She's originally from Kenya. She grew up in New Jersey, first gen like us. And she decided randomly got a great job and decided to move to Texas. And she was there for her first couple of weeks, and she was like, I'm having a lot of issues because I don't know how to make friends here.
Yeah.
You know, my roommate's not really up my speed. My coworkers are older. Like, how does one make friends? And
How?
I thought about it, and I said,
friends?
okay, what would I do if I was in that position? And I said, well, have you tried going to, like, you know, I would go to the synagogue. I would just show up and, like, go to the synagogue. And if there's no young people, there's going to be an older person who has a younger nephew, and I'm going to meet young Jews. And she was like, so you want me to walk into a church in Texas? And I was like, I guess not. And that's kind of where I realized that, you know, my community was pre-made for me, and I kind of have all these different diaspora pockets around the world. So what's the Coptic community like in that? When you showed up, you know, to Queens, you know, did you have family friends there? Did you know anyone else there? Who did you have your holiday dinners with? Did your parents know anyone?
That's really interesting. And I want to go back to a few things you said, but to answer your question first, when we moved to Queens, we moved to Ridgewood, Queens, which is a pretty Coptic neighborhood. There's a Coptic church right smack down the center, and when new immigrants come in, they kind of move there first. The church has some sort of an infrastructure where they try to help the people that are just newly arrived. And if you walk down the street, there's a few, you know, Copts here and there that linger. But what tends to happen is actually as you assimilate, you move out of the community, which I always found fascinating, because if we're trying to build roots, don't you want to stay within that community? But it's something that fascinated me, and I don't have an answer for it. But as we became more American, or rather not even more American, as we became less Coptic or less Egyptian, we moved out of Ridgewood. And it's really funny now because I live 10 minutes away from that church, and I'm going there now. But yeah, it was, I didn't know it at the time, but it was hard. And I think a large part of the immigrant experience is you don't know it at the time, but it was a difficult experience. We didn't have family around. It was just me, my two sisters, my mom, and my dad. And holidays were especially hard. We kind of, also nobody knew you were celebrating a holiday. The Coptic church follows a different calendar than the Western church, so we celebrate Easter and Christmas on different dates. So I'd have to take off from school, or maybe like go to school on Christmas and tell people, hey, it's my Christmas, and they wouldn't believe me. Or something even simpler, the Coptic tattoo, which if you know Copt, you know that we have these tattoos. Kids thought I was lying about it for the longest time. I remember this girl in 5th grade tried to take it off with hand sanitizer, like rub it off me. And it wasn't she didn't mean it with bad intention. She just didn't believe that I was, 9 or 10 and had a tattoo. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. I actually didn't know about the Coptic tattoo, so I'm learning a lot right now.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to learn much, much more. So yeah, you having a tattoo at, 9, 10 years old, I'm guilty of drawing on myself with pen, so I can understand where they're coming from. But I actually didn't know that about the Coptic tattoo. It's something I definitely want to hear more about. Remember, we're going to discuss this next time.
Yeah.
We're definitely going to talk about this next time. But, in college, walk into a party, and the first thing you get is, hey, what's up? So where are you from?
Oh, man.
What do you think about this question, and what's usually your answer?
I have a love-hate relationship with that question, the where are you really from question, because people see me, and I think we're both somewhat ambiguous looking. People don't know what racial category to place us in, and I hate that question because I don't know what to tell you. Like, do you want to know where I live? Do you want to know where my ancestors are from? Do you want to know where I grew up? Like, I'm from Queens, grew up in Egypt, also grew up in Queens, now I live in Brooklyn. Like, there's so many ways to answer that question, and I wish people, like, what are you trying to know about me? I think is, like, what do you want to know? Do you know where I live? Because that's a little creepy. But do you want to know who I am as a human being? I can tell you that, but I don't think you want to know 2,000 years of Coptic history at this party. You know what I mean? What's your response when you get that question?
Yeah, it's love-hate. Usually, if I want the easy way out, I just say New Jersey, and
in a New Jersey.
I'm
from New Jersey.
Yeah. And then they just kind of take it. But if I say Mexico, I get the where are you really from? And then I say, well, my grandparents are from Syria and Lebanon, and then they go, but where are you really from? And then I say, oh, you caught me. I'm just Jewish. Just another Jew who made her way around the world as Jews do because we're constantly exiled.
Yep.
So yes, we were in Spain and then they sent us to Syria and Lebanon and then they kicked us out and we went to Mexico and now I am here.
Yeah.
So it's a tough one. Again, and whenever I try to explain why I'm Canadian, that's always another one. So then it's like, I also realized it's easier if I just say I'm Canadian because even though, I could be a lot of things, if I just say, oh, Canada, they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But end of the day, had my family moved to Canada from Syria and Lebanon, I'd still be Syrian Lebanese,
Right.
And that's why nationality has kind of like this weird clash where, to me, it means a lot and a little because I don't really feel a lot of national ties. I don't feel a lot of nationalism. I feel a lot of respect for Mexico because they took my family in when other people wouldn't. I feel a lot of respect for my Syrian Lebanese culture. The foods we eat. My grandparents grew up speaking Arabic. I walk downstairs with a short skirt and I get Aib, take that off, That is the culture I grew up with, the Arab culture. And I feel a lot of respect for my Jewish religion. And I feel a lot of respect for who I am as a Jew and what it means to be a Jew. But if there was a world war tomorrow, am I really fighting for any of those countries? Am I really going to give my life for Mexico? Am I giving my life for Syria when they didn't want us? For Lebanon? Am I giving my life for Canada that I really just have a piece of paper?
Right.
And that's always been my conflict, my clash, where I love this country and I want to be part of it. But at the same time, we apply and apply and apply and we keep losing the lottery. So I have this weird clash where it's like, I'm so proud of all these different parts of who I am, but what national ties do I actually have?
Right.
And I don't know how you feel, with Egypt, if there was a world war tomorrow, who are you fighting for?
Whew. Wow, you're really digging in. Damn,
Digging in.
Girl. I have a confusing relationship with Egypt because, like you said, I love it, but it doesn't love me. And what am I supposed to do with that? Do I continue this unrequited love story with if it's really hard, honestly, to pick through the different thorns of this relationship. But I love America. This country took me in, as it does to so many people, and gave me everything I have. And I feel like that unrequited love from Egypt, I want to one day be loved by Egypt. Right now, I am not. And that's really tough, honestly.
I think exactly that tension is what I've been feeling.
Yeah.
All the time. And I think that that's also one of the issues I see with identity today, where everything is about checking all these boxes. But every single one of the boxes that we check is so much more complicated and it's so much more nuanced. And, when I check off, Hispanic on my forms, I feel like, am I betraying who I am?
Yeah.
If I don't check it off, am I betraying who I am? Am I allowed to identify as what I actually am? Because I might not be the full idea of what other people think it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's, when we first met, the biggest commonality I saw someone like me.
Aww.
Saw someone who, is in this country, who's building a life, being a modern woman in a modern city, who loves her culture, loves her religion, and is dealing with all of these tensions. And that's exactly why I'm so excited that we're doing the show. And I can't wait for more people to, hear our stories. I can't wait to learn more about you.
Yeah. Adela, that's so sweet.
Yeah, of course.
I think that you hit the nail on the head. That little box where you're supposed to check off who you are in a single box. I wonder if other people, do you feel the same way? I wonder if other people are feeling this frustration of like, how do I tell you who I am in a box? And is that coherent? There was never an Arab American slot to pick, but I the first time I saw it was just a few months ago, and it made me really happy. But another layer of it, I'm not Arab, I'm Coptic. Do we want a Coptic? There's so many things to untangle, and there's so many things that I have to go through, and I'm so grateful for you, and honestly, I you again hit the nail on the head. It's really nice to talk to somebody that feels the same frustrations and same anxieties about their identity and where they belong in the world, but also have completely different backgrounds. Like, I don't think we've shared one experience, but we have the same emotions that are rooted in those experiences. And I'm sure there's a Hispanic person that feels the same way, a Black person that feels the same way. At the end of the day, we're all experiencing the same things through different world experiences.
Yeah, and I think
really
that's a phenomenon that's happening a lot now. I think also COVID gave a lot of people introspection, and a lot of people had the time to sit down and say, okay, where's my life going from here? What have I been doing up until this point? Before we were just kind of floating through life, and then we had a hard pause. And the hard pause was a time to reflect. And, you know, when it comes to all these identities, to commonalities, to checking boxes, I think that shows like this one are exactly what people need to hear. And I'm really excited to be a part of that.
Yeah. Can we talked about this. Can we end the episode off with our favorite Arab sayings? Every week or whenever we post these, we're going to end off with an Arab or a Spanish saying that our cultures do or say. And Adela wanted to kick us off with our first one.
The first one I used earlier today is Aib. So I said that if I go downstairs wearing a skirt that's too short, my grandpa would say Aib, which is a very Arab concept. It's a very Middle Eastern concept, which is almost like the shame.
Yeah, exactly. It's shame. We say Aib, obviously, but it's interesting that you guys like, there's different ways to pronounce it, and your grandpa says it. So Aib, if you do anything, especially as a woman, you're a walking Aib. Everything you do is Aib.
But you can also use it for lighter context. So, like, for example, let's say, like, you wanted to go to a wedding, you're super late to the ceremony, and you can say, like, should we go? And they'd be like, Aib. Like, you can't go now.
Yeah.
Oh, Aib to show up right now. So, you know, it's been used around a lot in the Syrian Jewish community. And by far, it's my favorite one because I think it's the one I grew up hearing the most.
I'm really excited to learn some Spanish ones.
Can't wait to throw them out there.
And there's so many Egyptian ones that you'll have a hoot and a half of the Egyptian ones.
I can't wait to hear that.
That'll be great. All right. Do you want to end us off?
Yeah, I think that this is a really great start to something, and we are very happy to see you next week on Americanish. We are the Daughters of Diaspora.